Regarding the events, and looking once again at our framework, we can see that there are 5 events defined within the Scrum framework. We have the sprint planning, we have the sprint in the center, we have the daily Scrum, we have the sprint review, and we have the sprint retrospective. So these 5 events will be depicted and will be detailed next. Let's start with the sprint. The sprint is the heart of the Scrum framework. So all the other events and all the artifacts and even the roles inside of a Scrum team revolve and live during a sprint. And one of the things that is clear in this diagram is that all the events have something similar to a clock inside each one of them. And each event also has another important aspect, is that it is a very tight line, so it's a very concise line. So this implies every event is a time box event. So it has a maximum duration, okay? So let's take a look at the heart of Scrum, or the sprint. The sprint should be at most 1 month. And once you start a sprint, all the other sprints should have exactly the same duration. So if you establish that you have a 1 month sprint, all the sprints for that project should be 1 month sprint. You could have less time for each sprint. You shouldn't have more time for each sprint. The idea for each sprint is to have a specific goal, a focus. So at the beginning of a sprint, you define the sprint goal. And at the end of the sprint, you will assess the sprint goal, if you have reached the sprint goal or not. The idea is to, during the sprint, to create a potential releasable product increment. And we're speaking here about software products. There are no changes that endanger the sprint goal allowed. You cannot introduce any change after the sprint started. So all the requirements and all the commitment happens at the beginning of a sprint. Once the sprint starts, the goal is stated, the commitment is done, and there aren't no changes accepted inside of the sprint. This is where the Scrum Master enters and actually protects his team by not allowing changes to occur within the time frame of a sprint. The scope should be clarified and renegotiated as the work evolves, and there are specific times to do this, at the beginning of a sprint, at the end of a sprint. All the other events are contained and related to the sprint. Sprints have equal durations during development. So if I have a 2-week sprint, all the sprints in the project will be 2-week sprints. When a sprint ends, a new sprint begins. So it's a loop and it's iterative. And the idea, when you go from one sprint to the next and up to the next, is to actually maintain the quality goals. You never address the fact, or you should never consider, to reduce the quality to improve the performance or try to improve the performance of a team. Okay? The fact that the sprints have equal durations during development allows predictability, so you can actually predict and you can estimate what you will be doing in the next 2 weeks, because in the previous 2 weeks you know what you have achieved. For instance, in extreme programming, this is known as yesterday's weather. And here is actually the same principle, because you are doing an empirical process where you are trying, you are experimenting, and you know what you were able to achieve in a 2-week period. So if you have the same amount of time and if you have the same team, you already know, you can predict what you will be able to deliver, and you should be able at the beginning of that sprint to commit to something with more security. This allows also to limit the risk, and sometimes this happens, this is very rare but it happens, sprints get cancelled. The person that is in charge of canceling a sprint is the product owner, and this basically happens because the sprint goal becomes obsolete. For instance, there might be a technological issue where another version of the platform that is being used comes out and there are missing pieces that were fundamental and crucial for the development that was being conducted. And this might be a good reason to cancel a sprint. This is traumatic and it's quite uncommon, okay? So usually what happens is that sprints go on and on and on and continue and continue.